Have you ever parked your car, walked away from it, and then come back hours later only to forget where you parked? If so, don't worry, it happens to the best of us. Usually we find the car again after a panicked search. We imagine that you'd be a whole lot more panicked if you lost any of the cars in today's video though. They're all worth huge amounts of money, and yet they were all abandoned by their owners. We're all probably familiar with the concept of a barn find, a car that's been parked in a forgotten barn for years, or perhaps even decades. In the richest parts of England, there's a more upmarket version of a barn find, and that's a greenhouse find. Where else would you expect to find no less than 30 Jaguars than a greenhouse in glamorous Beaulieu, Hampshire? All 30 of the cars are decades old, and the majority of them are highly sought after and collectible E-Type Jaguars. Beaulieu Garage took the cars in from the abandoned greenhouse and found that most of them were likely to be long-term restoration projects, although 2 or 3 were capable of running after a day or two of attention. Unfortunately, the purpose of a greenhouse is to preserve heat and humidity is very bad for anything that can become rusty. Most of the damage is superficial though, so after restoration's complete, the collection is likely to be worth several $100,000. We wouldn't normally show you Jaguar E-Type discoveries back to back, but this next discovery has such an amazing story that we couldn't help ourselves. It was found in a French barn in 2013, falling to pieces and reduced to little more than a chassis. This E-Type was a great-looking fixed-head coupe, chassis number 15, when it rolled off the production line in 1961. But by the time the restoration company, Classic Motor Cars of Bridgenorth, found it, it was little more than an unusual birdhouse. The experienced team was briefly worried that it would be a restoration job too demanding even for their talents, but 3,000 hours of hard work later, they're happy to say they were wrong. What makes this particular car so special is that it was one of only 6 to go on display at the Scottish Motor Show of 1961, and the only one to feature a pearl gray paint scheme and light blue interior. Once it was restored, it returned to the motor show stage, this time in London in 2016. It will probably hurt the hearts of Lamborghini enthusiasts to see this beautiful car in such a sorry state. It's a Lamborghini Countach LP400 Periscopio, and it's obviously seen better days. Discovered in storage in Switzerland in 2019, it's thought that its most recent owner crashed it 40 years ago, had it dragged to where it was found, and then never came back to give it a second look. Only 150 of these cars were ever built, and one of them sold for more than $1.3 million at an auction in 2015. Although that one had the benefit of being in mint condition, Simon Kidston, the head of Kidston Motor Cars, saw pictures of the car online and decided to have it brought back to Italy for the ultimate restoration project. When restoration is complete, it's likely to be worth even more than the car that sold in auction in 2015, because this battered relic is the only one of its kind that came with a blue turquoise shade for both its exterior and interior. The history of the Tucker Torpedo is long and complicated. 51 cars of its class were built by Preston Tucker in Michigan during the 1940s before the company went bankrupt. The most famous of which is the Tucker 48. It was worth around $4,000 when it was released in 1948. By the time it turned up on the television show, it's worth what? In 2011, that value had shot up to $1.2 million. Even replicas have value, especially if they're as weird and unique as this attempt to replicate a 1946 Tucker prototype with its trident nose. Although it's a surprisingly close visual match for the original 1946 car, it's actually built around the shell of a 1971 Buick Riviera. Being so rare and valuable doesn't keep a car safe from abandonment, though. Look at the state of this one. Tucker chassis 1035 exported to Brazil in 1968 and then abandoned when its owner passed away in 1975. This is thought to be one of only 5 Tuckers that exist outside the United States of America, but it's thought that it will soon be headed back to its home country for a full restoration. Part of that restoration will involve removing the drivetrain and dashboard of a Cadillac Series 62 from 1947, which had inexplicably been grafted onto the Tucker at some point in the past. Having an expensive car doesn't necessarily mean that you have any common sense. Nobody with common sense would allow their 320,000-pound white Lamborghini Countach to run out of petrol on a bridge in the middle of London, which is how this beautiful car came to be stuck where it was. Under normal circumstances, the owner would have just telephoned for help. But these weren't normal circumstances. The police attended the scene of the abandoned car, ran a license plate check, and found that the owner was wanted on criminal charges. That might explain why they chose to run away from their car rather than seeking assistance from anybody. The car was eventually towed away and held at a compound belonging to the police, and the driver was eventually found and arrested. It's possible that the car might end up at the police auction in the future, but if it does, someone could end up acquiring a stunning 1980s supercar for a fraction of its true value. The BMW 507 is a pretty car, but you wouldn't usually think of it as being especially valuable. This individual car, though, has a stunning story behind it that elevates its value through the roof. It was built in Germany in September 1957 and was shown off later that month at the Frankfurt Motor Show. The following year, it was sold to a young American soldier who was stationed in Germany. You might have heard of the soldier. His name was Elvis Presley. It was during this time with Elvis that the car turned from white to red. Elvis grew tired of female fans scrawling messages on his white car in red lipstick, so he had it painted red to solve the problem. When Elvis left Germany, he took the car with him, but sold it to a dealer in New York. From there, it became a racing car driven by Tommy Charles until 1963. Jack Castor took it from Tommy as a broken-down restoration project, but never got around to restoring it. From 1964 to 2014, it never saw the light of day. Now it has, and it's been fully restored to the condition it was in when it was brand new in 1958. What's the true value of a car once owned by Elvis Presley? Probably priceless. Classic car enthusiast and journalist Gaynor Cotter lives and breathes vintage cars, and she's always going looking for a story. She found a remarkable one in Sarlat, France in 2010. There, in the workshop of another car enthusiast known only as Alain, was the rusted shell of an unrestored 1928 Type 44 Bugatti. Astonishingly, it was given to Alain for free. The owner of the car had passed away some 30 years previously, and without him to care for it, the vehicle had been left unguarded in an overgrown field on his former property. Alain made contact with the family of the owner, and they told him it was his if he could find a way to remove it from the land. Needless to say, he did exactly that, and it's been sitting in his workshop ever since. As the car has never been restored, it still has its original fixtures and fittings. The shell may be badly rusted, but the engine has survived the passing of the past 90 years surprisingly well. This next story sounds like a fairy tale in the Belgian countryside. There's an old abandoned castle, derelict and forgotten. Below the castle is a parking lot, and sitting in that parking lot, invisible to the outside world and covered in decades worth of dust, there's a fleet of Alfa Romeos from the 1960s. 6 of the cars were found in total, forgotten beneath the Kasteel van Heers, a historical building that's been standing since the 13th century. The castle was seized from its last owners by the government in 2007 for non-payment of maintenance charges and other fees. And when the owners left, they appear to have left their highly valuable classic car collection behind. The castle remains empty, and it's thought the cars didn't receive any visitors for 5 years until a team of urban explorers broke into the property and found them waiting in the dark in 2012. One of the cars is unusual looking, and it's theorized that it might be a prototype built by Michel Desmassières. Michel tried his hand at racing during the 1960s and is known to have raced a prototype Alfa Romeo in 1964. You sometimes need a very good eye to identify the value of an abandoned car. To the average person, this green and moldy-looking vehicle looks like a heap of junk. But if you know your cars, you've already realized it's an Aston Martin DB82. Even you might be surprised to find out that it's worth $1 million, though. This isn't just any old DB2. It's a prototype that took part in the LeMans 24-hour race in 1949, finishing 7th overall and 3rd in its class. It was raced for more than 20 years beyond that by Bill Whitehouse and then Christopher Engel. But by 1971, it was badly broken down and its racing days were over. After that, it spent 30 years in a garden before being stolen in 2002, then recovered by the police, thankfully without suffering any further damage due to its theft. $1 million is a lot of money to spend on a car that isn't currently capable of running, but it's a remarkable piece of history. While we're on the topic of abandoned Aston Martins, we have to ask ourselves, who would abandon a Zagato Aston Martin? We suspect the answer to that question is someone to whom money is no object, and all the evidence suggests we're probably correct. This particular car is one of a series that were built to order for the Sultan of Brunei in 1997. Modeled on the V8 Vantage V600, it's one of 3 of the same type and class. At some point in its past, it was exported to Brunei, but it's made its way back to the United Kingdom and is currently sitting under a cover in a very wealthy suburb of London. A little research indicates that the Aston Martin hasn't had a valid MOT since 2008, and on that basis, we can say with confidence that it hasn't been driven anywhere for at least 12 years. As to how it came to be where it is, it just so happens that the Sultan of Brunei owns a house on this street. He thought enough of the car to have it brought back to his London home, but not so much that he's paid any attention to it for more than a decade. From London, we're now headed all the way to the opposite side of the world to find an abandoned third-generation Lotus Esprit in Melbourne, Australia. This once proud car has been left out in the open to face the elements, and we're very sad to say that it doesn't seem to have held up too well. The tires are as flat as can be. Several nests of spiders appear to have set up permanent homes in the bodywork. Cars very much like this have been used in movies as stereotypical luxury cars for millionaires. Even James Bond has driven one more than once. Someone presumably paid big money to acquire this Esprit many years ago, but they haven't spent a single dime on it for a very long time. We don't know what the story is here. Perhaps the owner passed away, or perhaps they no longer have the money to pay for its upkeep. We hope that a more suitable situation for a car this beautiful can be found soon. Back when the Jaguar XK120 was launched in 1954 with its inline-6 engine, it was the fastest car in the world with a top speed of 120 miles per hour. Back then, that sort of speed was almost unthinkable. We think it would take a lot of care and attention to get this XK120 back up to speed now, but it wouldn't be impossible. They would have to start with the engine, though. At some point in the past, someone has taken out the original engine and shoved a Ford V8 in there instead. Nobody seems to know how long it's been standing in the open in Connecticut, USA. It's possible that it belongs to a former car collector. The fading Aston Healey 3000 next to it would suggest so at least, but the interior and exterior of the car have seen far better days. But it isn't a complete write-off, so it's probably an attractive job to the right restoration expert. With a guide price of $77,000 even in this condition, it might just turn out to be a worthwhile investment. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.